we go? Okay, Shawnee, today in your input you spoke about what's happening to the community sector. Could you enlarge on that a little bit?
Yeah, well, the community development program was started first. There was a set of guidelines drawn up, which basically said that the community development projects were meant to be catalysts for change. Um, However, from about 2002 on, that kind of switched, and the emphasis was put on to providing services in the community. That was the interpretation put on by the then minister in McCreevy. And consistently after that, all of the moves seemed to be delimiting the boundaries of community development and supplanting that with a kind of service provision model. And then also at the same time, from 2002 onwards, there was all sorts of other ideas which weren't natural to the kind of community development that we used to operate and were being introduced. Things like asset-based community development, volunteering, those kind of things. And the whole emphasis was basically to deliver cheap services in disadvantaged areas where normal services would not be provided. So that changed the whole emphasis. Coming along with that, we would then introduce the things into the programme like eligible measures, and increasingly the eligible measures were less and less, and everything we did had to fit into those eligible measures. So it removed the freedom of community development projects to kind of to respond in a proactive way to the problems that were emerging in the communities, the ongoing problems that had been there, like employment issues, housing issues, urban renewal issues. So our capacity to work on those kind of issues were extremely limited. At the same time, there was a strict control of the things you could do. Things that were natural for community development projects to do, like advocacy, were removed from the programme, therefore you weren't allowed to do it. It was also there was also an attack on the whole idea of networking. Now, networking is fundamental to the way we operated, communities learning from each other, individuals and different housing estates learning from each other and combining their experiences, and all of that became increasingly more difficult. This was followed by consistent cuts in the budgets, and that long predated the austerity measures that were introduced by the government since the crash in 2008. So we were well down that road anyway, and it just struck us that the austerity situation just gave them an extra excuse to do what they were doing anyway, and to do it with a vengeance, if you like.
And just in terms of the impact on the communities, and often very marginalised communities that are the recipient of those type of measures, what has been the impact on those?
Well, it's difficult to say precisely what the impact is, except in the sense that there was a period when there was a great feeling of optimism when the programme was set up first. It was in response to the European Tour Combat Poverty Programme, and it was set up with great hopes, and they were meant to be small in number but well resourced. All of a sudden we had community developments, all projects all over the country, many of whom weren't doing anything that could be described as community development at all. And the decisions about who got funded and who didn't get funded became quite arbitrary. So the fundamental responsibility of community development projects to build self-esteem, to build the educational levels, to build the responses to the difficulties that people found themselves in were undermined. At the same time, we were going through a very severe heroin crisis, and that was that was a very, particularly in Dublin, that was a major issue for many communities. The strategies that had been developed to deal with that problem were also undermined, and so we had a loss of emphasis and a loss of funding on the local drugs task forces. Our ability to create rehabilitation projects for people who are victims of the drugs crisis were severely limited, and are still being limited. The abolition of the dual payment meant that we couldn't use community employment as a source of rehabilitation anymore. It was extremely difficult. We had childcare issues. So the whole thing, in my view, has been undermined.
Okay, and you mentioned in particular housing, and housing is a fundamental right, the right to shelter, and that has been severely affected.
Well, that's mainly affected by the withdrawal of the local authorities from housing management. We had the introduction of the social housing association models that were developed in Britain in the 70s and the 80s, and a lot of these models came out of the squatters movement in London. So you had organisations that developed from that, like the St Pancras Housing Association. They formed Irish branches. In that case, it's Fluid Housing. Very good organisation, doing very good work. The difficulty is in access to their housing, because under the old local authority regulations, that was done by, strictly speaking, by a point system, where you got points on the basis of need, and that could be medical need, the size of the family, all of those kind of issues would be taken into account. That's all gone now, and you still have to qualify for local authority housing through how long you're on the waiting list. But having said that, that's followed by an interview, and the interview is done by the Social Housing Association, and naturally enough they don't want anybody with any problems in the properties that they're managing. So therefore the capacity of anybody who has a history of convictions of any kind, whose children may have been involved in antisocial behaviour, there's an addiction problem in the family, or any kind of difficulties, they're effectively ruled out of housing because they're perceived as a potential problem. We tried to address that within the Dublin Docklands Development Authority by putting into the 2008 Master Plan a facility for supported housing, because we recognise that there are families who have difficulties managing, and they should be supported to get through those difficulties. So the supported housing idea was based on the fact that you could get them used to living in public housing, with people to help them manage their budget, with people to help them with the children, with the health issues and stuff like that. But of course the authority collapsed at that stage, so that was never implemented, and I don't see any sign at all of that kind of an approach being adopted in the present arrangements. And I've absolutely no doubt that those families and all of them, the children, they are being denied their right to housing as it's identified in the UN Declaration of Human Rights, and also as contained in many, many treaties that the Irish government has signed up to.
Okay, just finally, what's required, by activists and NGOs and community organisations to try and fight this back, to try and regain some of those economic, social, cultural rights that have been eroded over the past year?
Well, I think that the first thing we have to do is identify what's going on here, and I think it has been publicly identified by our President, Michael D. Higgins, in raising the issue that what in fact is going on is that a neoliberal model of development has been introduced here by stealth. Nobody was ever told about it, nobody was ever asked about it, and nobody ever voted for it. But in reality, that model, what the end game of that model is to have everything other than the army and the police to be handed over to markets, and where there are difficulties and poverty and all the rest of it, that should be dealt with by charity or philanthropy. I don't think that's any way for a modern, wealthy country like Ireland to operate. Notwithstanding the collapse in the economy, this is still one of the richest countries in the world, and it seems very, very obvious to me that we're going backwards instead of forward.